Hi, and welcome to Visibility Unlimited and Visibility Unlimited Spotlight, the video portion to the podcast, Visibility Unlimited. I'm Nance Schick, your host and the owner of the Kava Group. I'm looking forward to having this conversation. It is very timely. It is rare that I have repeat guests, but I needed to call my friend and colleague, Nance Schick, and as many of you may have remembered, she's an employment attorney. She's a mediator. We sometimes get to work together. Regardless, sometimes we just need to get on the phone together and go, what is this? How do we make sense of this? What are you telling your clients? What's happening? And so in light of what is going on in the world, removing DEI, but the state of employment of moving DEI, because people are speaking about, oh, DEI is gone. But when it comes to employment, when it comes to discrimination laws, when it comes to people under the umbrella that are protected classes, the laws have not changed. Nancy, what are you seeing? And welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me back. You know, I always love being with you. So this will do for now until I can see you in person. But what I'm really seeing is a much more serious topic, right, than us being just together. It's that I'm seeing a couple of things. The first thing is what you pointed to, is I had someone in a meeting last week say to me, wait, we still have to worry about all those anti-discrimination laws. We still have to do the mandatory sexual harassment training in New York. Yes,
Yes.
all of that.
All of that plus a little bit more.
Right. And if you're not doing some sort of training, despite the bans at the federal level, if you're not a federal contractor, for example, this doesn't really apply to you the same way. So nothing's changed that much for you. Right. So if you're not in that kind of trickle down, then, and you're a business owner like me or you, we're still subject to the same laws. It's the federal contractors, the federal government. It's some state governments are being, they have that attachment to the DEI bans because they have a state law that's supplementing the federal and kind of mirroring the federal. But for example, in New York, most employers are still subject to the same things because you're under New York law. And so you've got New York City, you've got New York State, you may have a locality that has its own laws if you're in a big enough area. So you may have a whole lot of other things to look at. And so the federal ban, just like, don't look at that, right? Be mindful that yes, the Department of Justice could criminally investigate you technically under the executive order until there's been a finding otherwise. We should assume that's still possible. But for the most part, you still need to be doing all the training, making sure that you're not allowing an environment where discrimination can occur. And the other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is where that's not being addressed is you're seeing protected classes come in conflict and employers don't know how to address it effectively.
Well, they didn't know how to address it effectively before, so we can get into that in a moment.
That's exactly my point, is that some of this is we were already struggling as a society, as employers, right? I wouldn't have so much work if employers were not struggling with this, right? And so instead of saying, oh, whew, that's one less thing to worry about, it's like, no, you should be probably talking to your attorney right now, your employment attorney, or making a relationship with one, developing a relationship with someone or an expert like you, someone who works in these spaces to navigate the anti-discrimination laws and create a culture where you're not having that. Because the other thing that's coming up is that Ames case, right? There's the Ames case before the Supreme Court. And right now what we're expecting is that the Supreme Court is going to say Title VII reads, no discrimination based on sex, race, ethnicity, etc., right? And that means no discrimination based on that. So we used to say reverse discrimination, but we are anticipating the Supreme Court's going to say it's just discrimination.
Right. There is no reverse discrimination. Discrimination is discrimination.
Right.
regardless of who it is or what it is. The protected classes are still protected classes.
Right.
Let's take a few steps back. I think everyone did assume once the DEI, I think, bans, whatever you want to call them, left, that it was just a free reign, right? And so everything, throw the baby in the bathwater out. We can go back to whatever it was before 2020, and I don't have to do anything. Well, for some, it is law, and you're right. So they're going to have to follow their state law, their mandated things. If you are a small business and you are collecting federal funds, you have more of a chance to being investigated and doing those types of things. This is not about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Number one, in your company, I will always say this is about the culture for what you have set and what do you have in place to handle these types of situations. And it cannot just be, and this is a conversation I had last week with a client, you cannot hand a handbook to someone when they come in, they sign off that they received it and they've read it, and expect 5 years from now, when you've probably updated it, done addendums, passed it out again, made everyone sign again, that they read it again and they received it, and don't go through it. So it's time to have these workshops on understanding the process and the procedures that happen if you do report something. Because we also have employees that have always been terrified to go in and report. Who do they report to? HR. That means I don't have a job anymore. My manager, that means I'm not going to get promoted. And so having a clear process and procedure on how and who and the options that you can use to report. And then what's the process after you report? To a certain degree, I know they stop sharing the process, but most people don't even know what that process is. So here we are fighting things in court that people rarely even know where to really start where they're in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a really key point, is that when people don't feel heard, right, that's when they'll go to the lawyer, because they're like, the lawyer will make me be heard. And I can say that from my own experience, that I had a lawsuit against a prior employer and I did not want to sue, but after they let me go, they withheld some of my earnings. So I called the wage and hour division in the state where I was living at the time. And during the course of that conversation with them, they heard something. They said, we would like you to talk to the Department of Human Rights.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got into my discrimination case. I knew I had those rights, but I probably was not going to say anything, right? Because I was young and I was climbing the ladder, as they say, in my career. So I didn't want to rock the boat. I was worried about my prospects for future employment, because this was a long time ago. I'd like to think we've improved some, but many
I
people tell
know.
me every day we haven't. And it's, there are some industries that are worse, some employers that are worse. And I think that's another thing that I like to bring to the conversation always, is that there is no broad generalization that covers everyone. So what my job is to do is to look for the ones, yours as well, look for the ones that have work to do, right? Like, we all have some to do, but we're looking for the ones that have the most work to do, because they recognize that it's causing them the loss of key employees, et cetera. But that's where it starts. It starts with the employee not feeling heard. So even when they do go to the supervisor, right? So often, had this the day before yesterday, I think, I just heard this again, so often it's in the employee handbook, oh, we have an open door policy, right? So then employee goes and uses the open door policy and they get the eye roll or the, whatever, the sigh of
Busy. We're
like,
busy.
oh my gosh, you're annoying me. You're taking up time and space and I'm busy. Yeah, that's not going to resolve a problem. And that's the first indication the employee gets that they don't really have an open door policy and that their concerns are not actually going to be addressed. And so often it just takes a few conversations to address it.
But that goes back to, again, right? The culture of the company. Is there process procedures? Maybe I can't speak to my manager. Who else can I go to beyond HR? Do we have that set up? Right?
Right.
How do we communicate internally? what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? Because there's a lot of people, a lot of companies that I work with that communicate, but their tone for which they communicate is not one that is welcoming and opening to bring issues to the table.
Right.
So there, there's that. And then there are companies that we know will do the assessments and will do all the surveys. And I work with a lot of companies that I help create the survey for their culture. And nothing against any of the ones that you can buy, but I think something is missing if you don't have an outside person asking certain questions as you're building this. But, and you've probably heard me say this 10,000 times if you've ever listened to me, data is as good as it is unless you do something with it. Data on itself sitting on someone's laptop or someone's desk doesn't do anything unless you can actually go through the data, extract some things, and build on it. You have to build on it. You have to do something. And then the data for me is still not good enough. And I will give credit to a company I just worked with, but I did listening sessions after on all different levels. And that was another data touch point so that we could have what was on paper, right? And we can have what people were saying, and we can build a strategic way to address the issues at hand.
And I love that you're saying that, because what it reminds me of when you say that, the data is only as good as what you do with it. And you think about, like we all have access to data on our financial situation, right? The banks will tell us exactly how much money we have, right?
They have
Or
no
don't have,
problem.
right? And so it's that information, what you do about that matters. And that brings up usually a bunch of hidden biases that you have about money, about how you should make money, all of your mindset around those kinds of things. And if you're not getting into the roots, like it's the same thing with company culture, right? You have to get underneath and see what's really driving it. Not, like you said, what's on your wall, what's in the handbook, what you bring forth when you're putting out your, what I'll call your online dating profile for employees, right?
But that mission and that vision, right? Not that it may change, but we're also working in a different way, society, mindset than when that mission and vision was probably written. So are you reevaluating what it says? Do you give new meaning to how employees and the board, because we always want to keep them separate, employees, the board, everyone is looking at that mission and vision. And that way, that has to come off a wall, has to come out of a handbook, and it has to be reevaluated of the culture that you're going to bring, because we have now, where we spent 4 years speaking about LGBTQ plus, Black, brown, race, gender, disabilities. Now that's taboo again to speak about. Nobody wants to bring that up.
Right.
But yet some people feel like it's open field of hunting season, and they can say what they want or do what they want without any consequences.
Yeah.
And
And
so
they're going to learn. They're going to learn. I can tell you right now, I can think of 3 people I've spoken to in the past couple of weeks that have lost their jobs. And, under this concept of employment at will, because I don't know if this is a trend, but in my office, it looks like a trend. And so I'm watching this, right? Is that I'm getting more calls from people who are losing their jobs without any kind of explanation of the cause, right? They didn't even see it coming. And usually the employers are saying, well, it's at will employment. And in the pre-DEI ban days, a lot of these organizations probably would have done a risk analysis and addressed whether there are potential claims in a way that I don't think is necessarily being done, at least based on what I'm seeing. I don't know yet, because again, it's 3 cases, potential cases that came in the past couple of weeks, but it does seem like there's this idea of now employment at will means I can just let you go for cause or not for cause, just for any old whim. But what's happening is I don't think those employers are fully addressing whether there was something else going on that might have, for example, if an employee's performance changed, maybe they're being harassed. Maybe they're being discriminated against. Maybe they're being bullied, right? And if you're not still doing those analyses, you're going to miss that you had discrimination going on in your workplace that you didn't root out, and it will get you sued. So this idea that suddenly it's a free-for-all, I don't have to worry about DEI anymore. It's my company. I can do whatever I want. That's not actually true.
But you
You
do
don't,
need to worry about people
yes,
because people are looking at the bottom line, and yes, they are cutting positions, and that's how they're getting away with a lot of this. Oh, this position is being dissolved. This is moving here. We can get, and yes, for some that is true. It is the way they are doing it, again, that I have, issues with, or sometimes when I'm bought in and say, now help us fix our culture. I'm like, but you just let 10 people go.
right,
And the way, again, that tone, how they were communicated, now you've lost trust and
right,
respect. And that
right.
becomes a whole nother thing that is all part of this, because someone will sue you just because they're mad at the way that it's coming after, not even them sometimes, because I worked on a mediation case this way with a big company, but the way it was done to someone else.
Yeah.
And so you don't know where it's coming from. And if you don't have the culture of being able to have that conversation or to give context to things, I think more companies stay in trouble because they say what they say, and this is all you need to know, because there's no such thing as transparency, which I tell every staff member, stop asking for that and ask for visibility, because visibility allows you to have context and have clearly of how you get to move through that company, because you're never going to have transparency because those books are not your books. And when I say book, I mean records, money, especially nonprofit. I want to know where the money goes. You're never going to always know where the money goes.
Right.
So ask for visibility on how you actually get to survive through this company each day.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because it's what I call the rule book, right? I often will have employees come to me when they've been put on a performance improvement plan, for example, and they like their jobs, they want to stay in their jobs, they've invested a lot, maybe they're on partner track at a law firm, or they've been at a company for a really long time and are close to retirement, don't want to start all over. Plus they like their coworkers, they like their work, right? And so they're like, but suddenly I've got a new manager and they hit me with this PIP. And they always say, and if they would just tell me what the rules are, I would play by them. And I
Right.
said, here's the thing. First of all, your PIP is your rule book, right? That's your rule book for right now. And we have to look at it in the context of the employee handbook and what your employer says it is, even if that's not what you're seeing,
Yeah, but you
right?
have to call them out on it. No. Okay,
Right.
we're have this conversation. I'm going to say
Okay.
no to that.
Okay.
Have this rule book here, right?
Hmm.
And everyone says, go buy it. I'm going to go. Now, I'm someone that reads. I don't care how many hundreds of pages of a rule book. I go through it with a fine tooth comb before I start working with any company.
Right.
I start asking questions.
Hmm.
And 9.5 out of 10 out of 10, the person that wrote it was written by somebody that the attorney to this, to that, and that. And they can't explain it past the two steps that's sitting here. So
Right.
no, you need to go and you need to ask questions. And if you're in HR, and I know there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of things happening, but the easiest way to combat those issues is to every 6 to 8 months, let's do a recap on what our health benefits are, where your investments going, how you report any isms that may not be going in the right direction. Here's how we do things. Here's your mental health package. All of those things. I don't care how many Google Docs with folders and this and all the other things that are out there. You say, oh, the paperwork's there. All you have to do is look in this, and take
Well,
it out of that.
I don't think we're necessarily saying different things. I
Mm-hmm.
think what the issue is that a lot of the employees that come to me that are in that situation, and they come to me because they know I'm a lawyer and a mediator, right?
Right.
So they're like, I want to figure out how to work this out. And sometimes the employer is not in a place where they're willing to talk to me, right? We're not going to do this in a three-way conversation. And so the employee still wants to keep their job. So I end up kind of shifting role to show them, here's how to, look, I'm just going to go ahead and put the cards on the table. I will show them, here's how to play within the rules you've been given, right? So that here's the kicker, right? Here's the kicker.
I know where you're going.
Yeah,
Put my
you know where
mediator
I'm
hat on
going.
right now.
So, and I'm just going to warn employers, this is what I'll do, right? Because my job is to make sure that these processes are fair. So I will then effectively coach the employee how to document that they've done everything by the rules they were given,
Yes.
right? And when the employer still doesn't let up on them, it becomes pretty clear that there may be a discriminatory intent at play.
Mhm.
There may be a potential lawsuit. So that's the warning that I'm giving employers in this conversation is, look,
Yes.
don't assume that your employees don't know their rights. They have more ways to learn than ever,
Yes.
and they are educated. You're not respecting them, which is one of the reasons they're consulting a lawyer.
Absolutely. So, I was laughing because I was like, I know you're going to go there. It's conflict coaching. Same
Yep.
for in mediation. If the other party doesn't show up, how do you continue on knowing that this issue is there? If this
Right.
is somewhere you're going to stay, you have to figure out how you show up each day. And that's
Yep.
something I always say when I'm doing one-on-one meetings with everyone. If this doesn't work, give me your best scenario. It works. What does that look like to you? What does it feel like? What's it sound like? If it doesn't, how do you continue to move forward? And what does that look like, sound like, and feel like? And that's part of conflict coaching. And so, I get to do that part, hopefully, before they get to you in
Right.
regards to, okay, now there's a possible lawsuit here, or there needs to be another voice as part of
Well,
this conversation.
and that's the other part of it, is like the interesting thing is the majority of my cases over the years, I've defended employers. And so, that's part of what has driven me is because look, as a former plaintiff myself, I recognize that these are not clear cut. Then after years of defending employers, I recognize these are not clear cut. It's just like a divorce. There are always two parties involved, right?
What they say is there's three sides. Here's
Yeah.
the person, the right one. I don't know.
Or some people will say, or the truth. And I'm like, here's the thing about the truth. I'm not even sure what that is because I am never going to see the world the way you do.
Right.
You will never see it the way I do. Not 100%. We try. And that's why these skills become so much more important than ever, is that especially you start to throw in another, change that's in the workplace, is you start throwing in AI, which is going to do a lot of the repetitive tasks that don't require human oversight in the same way. It requires human supervision, but it doesn't require necessarily a human to do it. Well, that means the more human parts of work are going to be left for us.
Yes.
Right? Which means we have to develop these skills, which means we're going to have very uncomfortable conversations. We're going to have to get better at things like apologies and forgiveness, right?
Knowing how to show grace. But that's a workshop that I have been starting to be called on again is change management, but
Right.
not in the way that it used to be when it was the big, we're going to merge with companies.
That usually meant firing people.
There you go. Now it's some of that, right? But
Right.
it's also change management on how do we deal with these shifts because maybe people have been fired, but how are you going to show up with dealing with AI, dealing with agencies, working in a different way, teams being restructured? How does that happen? Because everyone doesn't do change well. And you spoke of that person that's been there for a long time and has the system and process and procedures painted in the back of their head somewhere. And now it's all
Change.
all shifting.
Yep.
And so these are workshops that need to happen. Courageous conversation, change management, process and procedures. What does context mean? What does visibility mean? What does leadership mean in the time of change management?
Right, right. And I think that's where we're going. And that's why I was really excited that we get a chance to talk about this again, because I get it. Like, so much is coming at us, especially for employers. Well, and really employees too. Let's admit it. You're worried no matter where you are. And something I've been also talking to a lot of people about is, don't forget that those managers, those first line supervisors, even the executives, they're employees too, and we don't always relate to them that way. So they're what I call the business sandwich generation, right? Because just like we have it in personal lives, is we have these people that are in the middle, and they're trying to answer to the upper management or the board, and they're also trying to address the concerns of the people they see every day. And they're trying to find that balance. And we forget that they're human too. And yes, they're going to occasionally make mistakes. We try to minimize those with the work that we do, but we also need to have a space for, look, people are going to make mistakes. So, if you're a first line employee, I've been there. I've been indignant. It shouldn't happen. The employee
Right.
handbook says this. It should not happen this way, or the procedures manual says this, right? And it's like, okay, I love your commitment to the rules. I'm a big rule follower myself, but sometimes you just have to recognize that not everything goes that way, and you find out why, and then you move on, because sometimes it's what we call in law de minimis.
But
Right?
but it comes back to, again, we have to remember we are working with people. And so I say that 10,000 times, and leaders look at me and they're like, Leslie, I know that. I'm like, but do you?
Right. Do you understand what
Because
people are?
you get caught in the work that needs to be executed and not who has to execute. And there's that, yes, the ones that are saying that leaders, they're like, but I'm not making the big decisions. I'm only making these decisions. And I'm like, okay, all of that, then there's still a disconnect all the way through, regardless of title. That comes back to what? Your culture.
Right. Well, and that's interesting too, because something you said earlier about the small business too is, I think, another unique aspect of that is that they own the company, they're employees in the company. I have many clients that are working side by side with their employees out on construction sites, or where, other types of work. Maybe they're wiring an office for technology, and they're right there on the floor with their workers, but they own the business. And we forget that they're also employees. So they're impacted, and they are human,
Yeah.
right?
And then, something, I want to skip back to the board, because also human, right? But
Right?
you also have to reevaluate your board at this time. And are they the right board that can lead in the world that we're working in?
Right.
And I think that really has to come into play to see that, to know that. I mean, we've seen it with Costco, we've seen it with Target, we've seen it on different levels on how boards are influencing or not influencing what they want. And so you have to go, ooh, do we have the right people now to help guide? Do we?
And that's interesting too, because I think that goes back to not just your vision or your mission, but it's also the conflict that I see frequently between what we declare are our values and what our actions show are actually what we value. And like, look, to take
Wait,
it,
wait, stop. Say that
yeah,
again. Say that again. I love that. Declare your values.
yeah, versus how your actions exhibit your values, right? Because I'll give a personal example to try and diffuse some of the emotion that might come with that, right? Is I say all the time how much I value my loved ones, right? But a lot of them would say, but you're always working, I never hear from you, or whatever. So my actions don't say that's my priority,
Right.
right? To them. And I think we have to recognize that as employers, as business people, what we declare are our business values might not be what our employees are saying. So if you're, and or our customers and clients, right? How many times have you heard that where, and if I'm mad at somebody I'm buying from, it's because I don't feel valued as a customer, right? Or a client.
Sorry, as much as I praised Target for all these years, Target has been, they yet again are the company that's showing that there is power in the purse. And when
Right.
someone, anyone, and then you put a group of society that feels that you have not only disengaged from them, but there's no respect there. There are other options.
Right.
And I think you have to remember, and then there's that other options, and there's the way that you say it. Because I just worked with a different company that was told, well, if you don't like it here, go somewhere else.
Right.
Watch what you say
Right.
and how you say it, because what people, when they leave and they leave mad or they leave disgruntled, that is what you get.
Right.
And that becomes the snowball for who you are on a consistent basis. So whatever you say you're going to do, right? Want to do, going to try to do, have ambitions to do, be accountable for it.
Right.
And can it be sustainable?
So interesting you use that word. Do you know the title of the book I'm working on?
No, what you
So, so I am writing my second book, and you're working on yours too, aren't you?
correct.
So mine is tentatively titled Unsustainable: Why Our Workplaces Aren't Working and What to Do About It. And I'm addressing a lot of these issues. And not in the, like, I feel like we need some fresh conversation around this, and admit that it will get messy. I think we know as entrepreneurs, you and I have been doing this for a long time, not just helping other businesses, but as entrepreneurs ourselves. And you just learn after a while that it's going to be imperfect. And we often describe it as flying the plane while you're building it. And you just get to a point where you accept that there will be messy days. And the resilience factor is the most important part. You have to persist. So, okay, so we hear DEI ban and we work in DEI. We go, okay, well, lots of employers, one, need to comply with the law. They all need to comply with the law. So, two, they still want to further the initiatives. They just need to figure out how to do it in the new
No,
realm.
there's no figuring out how to do it in a new thing. See, that's where this is what annoys me.
Okay.
This is where I get riled up. And this is why I've kept quiet through a lot of this. Because if your culture, which I have said, I was a cultural strategist from day one,
Right.
years before DEI. If your culture is part of the foundation, right? Your foundation, your culture, who you are, how you walk, how what you mean, how you move. If that is authentic and you've built it so it's sustainable and flexible, you don't have to worry about DEI because the talented people that are there will want to come and work with you because you will have a culture that allows them to show the talents for which they are bringing. So I am exhausted of hearing, sorry, that companies, oh, we have to figure it out now that we don't have DEI. That meant that it was an add-on and it was not the foundation.
Exactly. And I think that's the difference. And it's a gentleman that I've been following a lot, Dr. Jonathan Ash. I can't, he's British.
Okay.
You probably know who I'm talking about. I've been following him on LinkedIn. He's been talking about this as well. And I know you and I have been talking about this for a long time, is how so many people that jumped on the bandwagon in 2020, they did the ad campaign, they did the performative events. And so I think, again, we're talking about it we're talking about similar ideas, but I approach it as a lawyer, you approach it
I'm coming at it straight
and
on
so
because I have to dissect it every day.
right. Well, exactly. And I think what we've all been saying in this world, and I'm in a couple of groups where we're talking about how to navigate things, and it's ultimately what it comes down to is that exactly what you said. A lot of what had been done that we called DEI, right? were these performative measures to be able to go, oh, look at us, right? And I get it. Like, this is another thing. Like, I'm not here to demonize anybody about that. I think you could have done it a lot better, and I'm inviting you to do that. So I'm not going to demonize you here. But I think we also have to recognize that's part of the implicit bias that we talk about is this
Part
is
of
the
the issue.
human psychology. This is how the brain works.
Right.
You will respond to the world the way you've experienced it.
Mhm.
And you have to be aware that that's what happens. And just because you've experienced the world that way does not mean that that's how everybody did. That's
Absolutely.
why you have to have these cultures that
Mhm.
invite more participation of all types, right? And I think that's where we've been struggling. And that's what I've been seeing in my practice too, is that people, even with good intentions, some without, some who were just looking for the,
Yeah.
opportunity,
Kudos, right?
there's always going to be that. That's existed since biblical times,
Mhm.
right? It's like, right.
Yeah.
And probably before that, we just don't have it documented,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And
People look for
so,
opportunities.
right, recognizing that this is just the way humans work. So now what we have to learn to do, especially as I mentioned earlier, with AI coming in and taking away the things that humans don't do as well, like repetitive tasks, because we will screw up a lot more than a machine will on certain things. Now we have to get better at what humans are, which means we have to accept that we are also flawed.
We are flawed. We are different. And the thing with AI, which is a whole nother conversation that we don't.
Exactly. And we'll leave that to the big
We
experts
leave
on
that one.
tech.
I will call Charlie back for that. Is the fact that AI, everyone thinks is so magical. It is still being programmed by humans. And then who's programming it? Because if still it's not someone that looks like me, understands me, and that could be a Black American woman that lives in a metropolitan city that has traveled the world. It could be someone that has a disability that's in the metropolitan city to someone that has a disability that's in a rural area, but transportation issues are still the same but different.
Right.
If you don't have a majority of people that have different experiences, different cultures, different languages, you will get the same thing. And this is, as you said, this has been going on forever. It is a repeat, and we wash and repeat because we're not learning. And so we have some that are getting it, have gotten it, are sticking with. And I'm going to say, I'm not talking about DEI. I'm saying
Right.
recognizing human beings and the talent for which they bring.
Right.
And so that is what all of this at the end of the day, if you are looking at employment, everyone says, oh, I'm going to take all that employment criteria off. But then if you're going to take them off, then continue to take off if you've been arrested, if you get hot. Like there's a long list beyond race and gender.
Yep.
Because I think people thought DEI was just going to be race, and they didn't realize it was going to be gender, it was going to be veterans, it was going to be,
Disability,
disabilities, all of
physical
that.
and mental.
Right. And so we're scrapping who we are as people.
Right. And it's interesting that we're at this conversation because I know one of your big areas of focus is the disability. You have a lot of skill in that. And that's been something that I've been saying for a while in my trainings, as I said, look, the ADA gives us a really good standard
Yes.
for how to hire. It's look at the essential functions of a job. And I think what happens, I hear this over and over, I see it in my practice, I've been guilty of it,
Mhm.
right? Where you hire usually after you needed it, right? You needed
After you got
help.
into trouble.
You needed help, right? It's the same thing. You don't call a lawyer to be more proactive, and then you need me and you pay me a lot more money because you weren't proactive, right? And so, but it's recognizing that you're hiring under these circumstances a lot of times, and you're like, well, I know I need this. And well, since that person's here already, I'm gonna also give them this and this and this. And you're not mapping the job and the skills of the individuals that you're hiring. So you're inviting these problems, and then you're expecting them to be able to do something you didn't even hire them to do, and not providing them the training and the tools that they need to succeed in that. You're completely setting them up for failure.
So
And
here's what I
wonder
call
why
that.
they fail.
People love to say I'm accessible, and I go, but are you usable to the people that need to use it?
Right.
Because I can be an accessibilities officer all I want. I'm not someone that has a disability. That means my job is to speak to those that may need the service for which I am responsible, helping to execute and make sure it is there.
Right. And allow them a space, a culture where they can come to you. Because the other thing you don't want to do as an employer is look at somebody and go, oh,
Assume.
you look like you need this accommodation. No, 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 we don't do that. That's also discrimination.
Right. But that's what I'm saying, accessibility to usability.
Right.
Nancy, we could be on here for 2 hours. We know that.
Good.
I mean, let's do a small wrap up. At the end of the day, people need to still know what laws are viable. You
Right.
cannot just fire nilly-willy and just assume you can package it and just say that's it. There are laws that have to happen. There's compensation that may need to happen. There are things that are important that needs to know. And if you are going to say you're accessible, be usable.
Right.
And if you are an employee, you do have rights. You do not have to run to an attorney right away. You can run to both of us as mediators.
Right.
And try to work through things. And at the end of the day, we need to really step back and not knee-jerk everything that's happening, but really see what is best for your company beyond the bottom line, including the bottom line.
Well, and I think that's another big, really important point, is that a lot of people do that, binary, it's either bottom line or not. And the reality is, if we're not paying attention to the bottom line, we get that as business owners ourselves. If we're not paying attention to that, we're not around, right? Like if Leslie and I aren't doing that, we're not around to provide you the service in the same way. And so we've recognized that. And that's part of the conversation that can be more transparent, is sharing more data of what you really need from your employees and how it works within the business, because that's another disconnect. And I think the more that you're creating a culture that says we're on the same team, that's why I talk about employment being a partnership toward the attainment of mutually beneficial goals, right?
Right.
Because yes, you're taking a job because you have to, you need money, but you're also taking a job with a particular employer for a specific reason, and vice versa. You're hiring
There's a
that
passion in there.
employee
You enjoy
because,
it. That's where you want to be. That's where you see a good in the world. All
right,
those things. But it
yeah.
needs to make it make sense.
Yeah, we have to go deeper into what are the human reasons that we're coming together, and then build on those. And that's what we do as mediators.
Yes. Love that. Nancy, on that note, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, it's always great to see you. I can't wait to reconnect in person.
I know, me neither. Thank you so much for this. I hope it was valuable. If you all have questions, please reach out to us.
Absolutely. And where can they find you, Nancy?
So easiest way is probably just go to third ear CR for conflictresolution.com.
Thank you very much. Everyone that's been watching and listening, thank you so much for joining. As always, I'm Leslie Short, your host of Visibility Unlimited, the podcast, and Visibility Unlimited, the Spotlight, the video version. Please continue to follow us at the Kava Group on all social media and YouTube channel. Thanks. See ya and speak to you soon. Bye.